the winter of 1946, the North Atlantic was a graveyard of iron and memory. Among the vanished was Convoy RS-17, a classified Allied formation that had departed from Scapa Flow in February 1943 and was never seen again. Officially, it carried weather equipment bound for Murmansk under Operation Frostveil. Unofficially, fragments recovered decades later point to something far stranger, a shipment so secret that Admiralty records were purged and surviving personnel reassigned under false names. The last known transmission from RS-17 was a broken signal. Visibility 0, object above horizon. Orders unclear. Then silence, frozen into history like the ships themselves. Chapter 1. The Vanished Convoy of Operation Frostveil. On February 12, 1943, the convoy designated RS-17 departed from Scapa Flow under heavy escort. Comprising 6 merchant vessels and 2 destroyers, HMS Verdant and HMS Cotswold, it was officially logged as a weather research and supply mission bound for Murmansk. Yet the secrecy surrounding its cargo and the direct involvement of the Admiralty's research division hinted at deeper purposes. The lead freighter, SS Wendover, carried sealed containers marked only with the initials RTD, a classification used for restricted technology dispatches. The escort officers were ordered to destroy all documents if the convoy came under threat. The mission, labelled Operation Frostveil, was never mentioned in naval communiques again. By the time RS-17 reached the Barents Sea, U-boat activity had spiked. German command, aware of an Allied special convoy through intercepted Enigma fragments, dispatched Wolfpack Donnerschlag to intercept. The last recorded sighting was on February 16, 1943, approximately 230 nautical miles north of Svalbard. The weather deteriorated to hurricane conditions, and the convoy's final radio transmission was a string of garbled Morse bursts captured by the British outpost at Tromsø. Visibility 0, bearing lost, object above horizon. At 03:17 hours, communication ceased. When the ice thawed months later, reconnaissance flights over the Arctic routes failed to locate wreckage. No SOS was received, no survivors recovered. The British Admiralty classified the incident under total loss, probable enemy engagement. Yet, internal memoranda reveal a separate directive issued by the Directorate of Naval Intelligence on March 7, 1943. All further recovery operations suspended pending clearance from Cabinet. Office, Project Frostveil to remain off-record. The use of the phrase off-record was nearly unheard of in wartime archives. It implied not loss, but redirection. 2 decades later, in 1962, a joint Norwegian-British expedition conducted seismic mapping near Nordøstlandet, Svalbard. Using sonar equipment, they detected large metallic anomalies beneath 80 meters of ice, too large for submarines, too uniform for natural formations. Among the ice cores retrieved, fragments of aluminum alloy bearing British serial numbers were found. Yet the composition included traces of bismuth and magnesium in ratios unknown to standard wartime manufacturing. The fragments were sent to Oslo for analysis, but were seized within 48 hours by representatives of NATO's Technical Intelligence Division, citing national security interests. Eyewitness accounts from the expedition's members describe the swift arrival of unmarked American aircraft at Longyearbyen Airport. The wreckage fragments, along with the team's photographs, disappeared. One of the Norwegian researchers, Dr. Einar Holst, later testified in a private letter to his university's rector that the fragments emitted low-level magnetism, as though they contained active circuitry. His letter, dated March 5, 1963, was never published. Holst died in an automobile accident later that year on an isolated road near Narvik further. Investigation into RS-17 was stifled during the Cold War, when British historian Malcolm Travers filed a request under the Public Records Act in 1975. He received only a single document, Admiralty File 09-1943-FV, containing a single declassified paragraph. Convoy RS-17, operation suspended. Cargo not of conventional origin. Retrieval prohibited. The phrase echoed a line from a 1944 Joint Allied research directive referring to non-standard electromagnetic materials obtained via captured German research. This connection led Travers to theorize that Operation Frostveil involved the covert transfer of experimental stealth coatings derived from early radar deflection. Experiments, what post-war scientists would later describe as predecessors to radar-absorbent materials, Supporting evidence emerged when a retired signals officer, Lieutenant Arthur Wainwright, claimed in a 1982 BBC interview that his unit intercepted a strange frequency on the night RS-17 vanished. The transmission, he said, was not Morse but a continuous, oscillating tone that did not fade with distance. Wainwright described it as mechanical, as if generated by something in the upper atmosphere. He and his operator logged the event, but the records disappeared from the station's archive within a week. It was the only time, he recalled, that a superior officer told me to forget I'd heard the sea hum. In 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, fragments of captured British documents appeared briefly in Moscow's defense archives. Among them was a typewritten report from a Soviet trawler, Take 3247, dated June 1946, which described recovering metal shadows protruding from beneath Arctic ice, roughly along RS-17's last known route. The crew recorded a magnetic field anomaly and photographed the wreck before being ordered to cease and return to Murmansk. The negatives were confiscated by the NKVD. The report ends abruptly, concluding with the line, "Object resembles vessel hulls welded together by unnatural heat." It was signed only Lieutenant V. Koltsov. Official British naval historians have long dismissed the Frostveil incident as a lost Arctic convoy buried by shifting ice. Yet the absence of wreckage, the erasure of personnel rosters, and the classified seizure of debris point toward an operation whose secrecy outlived the war itself. Analysts suggest that whatever cargo the convoy carried, perhaps captured German research from Norway or unfinished radar prototypes, was deemed too sensitive, even for Allied disclosure. Others speculate the mission was a Cold War cover for post-war recovery of experimental technologies. A final curiosity surfaced in 2001, when a declassified RAF reconnaissance photo, taken during Operation Icecap in 1954, was re-examined. In the upper quadrant of frame 7B, analysts identified a faint outline beneath the ice resembling a convoy formation. 6 vessels arranged in parallel rows, half submerged. The image, authenticated by the National Archives, includes an annotation in pencil. Frostveil. No subsequent missions were recorded at those coordinates. The anomaly remains buried under layers of ice and silence. 70 years after RS-17's disappearance, the Barents currents still shift with the wreckage of wars past. The ice conceals more than steel. It holds a story erased from memory, a transmission half complete, and an object still waiting beneath the Arctic cold. Some claim that on certain radio bands, especially during magnetic storms, faint Morse tones can still be heard between stations off Svalbard. To most, it's dismissed as atmospheric noise, but to those who have studied the Frostveil files, it sounds eerily familiar, like a convoy still signaling home from beneath the ice, unanswered since 1943. Chapter 2. The Iron Cathedral beneath Dresden. In March 1945, as Dresden smoldered from Allied bombing raids, Soviet intelligence intercepts began recording irregular seismic readings emanating from beneath the city's southern districts. What initially appeared to be aftershock data soon revealed patterns, mechanical pulses, rhythmic, like the hum of heavy turbines buried deep below. A Soviet field team led by Colonel Viktor Polson of the 3rd Engineer Battalion was ordered to investigate once the Red Army took the city. Their findings were never officially published, yet fragments of their internal report, labelled Operation Eisencathedral, survived in post-war archives. The report described a vast underground complex extending from beneath the ruins of the Albertstadt Armory toward the Elbe, its existence corroborated by faint power signatures still detectable weeks after the bombings. The origins of this underground structure dated back to 1943, under an SS engineering initiative codenamed Project Morgenrot, Morning Red. Officially, Morgenrot was a civil defense infrastructure program intended to shield Dresden's industrial core from Allied air raids. In reality, it fell under the jurisdiction of the SS Technical Office, led by Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, whose previous involvement in Project Riese in Lower Silesia had already tied him to clandestine military construction. Kammler's files mention a Dresden site designated Morgenrot 4, authorized to receive special equipment from Peenemünde, and Thuringia in early 1945. That shipment's manifest was later found to include rotational field, apparatuses, and high-voltage conversion, units labelled Weber 12B. The terminology, unknown in wartime physics, suggests components of an experimental electromagnetic propulsion system. By April 1945, the war's outcome was all but decided. Still, work beneath Dresden continued. Civilian witnesses reported nightly movement of unmarked trucks and the sound of drills echoing from underground. One tram operator, Karl Neumann, recalled blue sparks under the cobblestones near Pirnaischer Platz. When he later tried to describe this to occupying Soviet officers, his statement was stricken from the official record. Another worker, captured in a post-war Soviet deposition, claimed that a device of circular form was housed in the deepest chamber, suspended by cables and fed by copper conduits. It was said to emit a low hum, like a breathing engine. His name was Emil Brandt, and after the deposition, he was never seen again. When Soviet engineers reached the site in May 1945, they encountered layers of flooded tunnels and collapsed supports. The deeper they dug, the higher the readings on their Geiger counters climbed. Not dangerously so, but enough to register active electromagnetic flux. Polson's team found 3 levels intact, each descending roughly 40 meters. The lowest chamber, which the surviving report names Kammer Null, contained a sealed hangar and an incomplete circular track lined with shattered porcelain insulators. One wall bore the faint insignia of the Schutzstaffel combined with a stylized sunrise emblem. In the corner stood a generator still faintly humming, despite no visible power source. The engineers ordered immediate evacuation of the lower chamber and sealed it with concrete. Over the following months, Soviet command designated the site restricted under NKVD authority. Kammler himself disappeared in May 1945, his last reported location not far from Prague. Whether he escaped or perished remains uncertain, though multiple Soviet testimonies allege that he was captured alive and transported to Moscow. None of these claims were substantiated. The Iron Cathedral, so named by Soviet soldiers for its vaulted metal chambers, was subsequently erased from Dresden's reconstruction maps. Post-war East German planning documents avoided reference to the area entirely, classifying the ground above as geotechnically unstable. In 1961, a power station project inadvertently drilled into one of the sealed access tunnels. Workers reported the sudden loss of equipment due to magnetic interference. East German authorities immediately halted construction, cordoned off the sector, and sealed the borehole under the supervision of Soviet engineers. The event was never reported publicly, but local archives contain a single page of correspondence between the Ministry for State Security, Stasi, and Moscow dated June 14, 1961. Subterranean installation remains active. Directive: maintain isolation. No excavation permitted. Decades later, during German reunification in 1990, researchers combing through Stasi archives found references to Eisen Cathedral, but every associated file was missing or replaced by placeholder sheets stamped. Material relocated. Directive Beria, 1946. The mention of Lavrenti Beria, former NKVD chief, suggests that the discovery was classified at the highest level during the early Soviet atomic program. It is conceivable that whatever technology or data recovered from Dresden was diverted to secret Soviet research facilities, possibly feeding into post-war propulsion or reactor experiments. One civilian photograph from the era provides a chilling glimpse. In 1945, a Red Army photographer named Alexei Mirov captured an image labeled Unterstadt Chamber, Dresden, 1945. The photo, rediscovered in 1994, depicts Soviet engineers standing inside a cavernous hall with arched metal ribs. At the center, half buried in rubble, lies a circular object roughly 6 meters across, smooth and metallic, reflecting the lantern light like polished steel. A handwritten note on the back reads simply, "It hums." Forensic analysis of the print confirmed its authenticity, though the object's nature remains unidentified. After reunification, Dresden's rapid modernization brought new subway construction beneath the city. In 2003, a tunneling crew unearthed a segment of reinforced concrete laced with rebar too thick for civilian use. Their instruments registered residual magnetism along the structure, prompting engineers to reroute the tunnel. An internal project memo from the Dresden Transit Authority recorded the incident with one cryptic line: "Unmapped structure encountered. Possible war-era debris. Area sealed under instruction of Bundesamt für Bevölkerungsschutz." The section remains off-limits. Even today, the southern foundations of Dresden hold secrets buried beneath layers of reconstruction. Locals occasionally report faint vibrations emanating from the ground after midnight, likened to a distant electrical hum. Seismologists attribute it to subway resonance or geological shifts. Yet an unmarked area south of the Elbe, fenced and surveilled, remains under federal jurisdiction. Satellite thermal scans of that zone show consistent heat signatures, though no visible infrastructure exists above ground. Whether Project Morgenrot achieved functional results remains speculative. Historians debate whether the Iron Cathedral was intended as an underground research reactor, an electromagnetic weapon, or a power generator derived from captured Allied research. What is known is that Dresden's underground remains uncharted by modern surveys and that all official documentation concerning Kammler's final projects was expunged from both German and Soviet archives by 1947. The big city's beauty was rebuilt brick by brick above a hollow silence. Beneath its foundations lies a secret chamber, sealed and humming, built by men who sought to bend nature itself. The Iron Cathedral sleeps under Dresden, its purpose erased but its pulse perhaps still faintly alive, an echo from a war that never truly ended. Chapter 3. Ghost Signals from the Atlantic Wall. In the summer of 1967, NATO signal intercept stations along the French coast began reporting an anomaly. Faint Morse bursts, irregular, outdated, and unmistakably German, were being received on frequencies once used by the Kriegsmarine. The first report came from listening post Alpha 7 near Cherbourg, followed by similar intercepts from British bases in Portsmouth and Plymouth. Analysts at GCHQ dismissed them as atmospheric reflections, remnants of wartime transmissions bouncing through the ionosphere. But when the messages began repeating in structured intervals, each containing coordinates matching obsolete Wehrmacht coastal batteries, the classification shifted from phenomenon to operational concern. The call sign was always the same: Delta II. The designation once used by a Kriegsmarine communications node in Saint-Nazaire, decommissioned in 1945 and sealed by Allied engineers. The coordinates in the messages traced a pattern across the old Atlantic Wall, from Calais to the Bay of Biscay. Every few nights, at precisely 1:20 hours, the transmissions resumed, as if following an internal schedule. Their content consisted mostly of grid references, some corresponding to U-boat pens destroyed in the final days of the war. Others led to empty shoreline cliffs or ruins already swallowed by the sea. Yet one sequence, decoded by British cryptanalyst Dr. Stephen Mallory, translated into a chilling phrase: awaiting command from Berlin. The British Ministry of Defence authorised a covert survey of the Saint-Nazaire site under Operation Greylight in late 1968. The operation, led by Lieutenant Commander Henry Willis of the Royal Navy's Intelligence Division, sought to verify whether residual wartime transmitters could still be emitting signals. The U-boat pens, massive concrete fortifications designed to withstand Allied bombing, had been partially repurposed by the French Navy. Beneath them, however, lay sealed lower chambers, flooded and forgotten. On October 14, 1968, Willis and his team descended into one of these sublevels through a maintenance hatch. What they found defied technical explanation. The chamber, roughly 50 meters long, contained rows of dormant transmitters arranged along the wall, each unit covered in decades of salt corrosion, yet some still faintly operational. Power cables led into the walls, though no active supply was present. When the team powered down nearby breakers, the equipment continued to emit a steady hum. Willis's log notes describe vacuum tubes glowing faintly despite disconnection. His report, declassified decades later, includes a single page stamped "Unconfirmed Energy Source." Photographs taken inside the chamber show a Nazi eagle insignia half scraped away, beneath which was written in fading paint: Führerbau West, Frequenzleitung Delta II. That night, the Saint-Nazaire intercept station recorded a change in the transmission pattern. The Morse sequence abruptly altered from grid references to a repeated set of numerals: 1945-05, 8. The date of Germany's surrender, then silence. The following morning, French naval authorities sealed the site and ordered the Greylight team to withdraw. Officially, the investigation concluded that residual radio feedback from abandoned submarine infrastructure had caused false signals. Privately, Willis wrote in his after-action note, The machines knew the date. He was reassigned within the year and died in 1971 under unexplained circumstances aboard a ferry crossing the Channel. In 1974, however, NATO's Shape Communications Division logged a near-identical signal pattern originating not from France, but from the Bay of Biscay, roughly 250 kilometers west of its original source. Intercept analysts confirmed the same call sign, WWII, an identical message structure. Yet no installations existed at those coordinates, only open sea. The transmissions were triangulated to an estimated depth of 200 meters. French maritime authorities dispatched the research vessel Jean Charcot to investigate. Using sonar, the crew identified metallic anomalies on the seabed, resembling reinforced concrete walls. The captain, François Leclerc, reported hearing a rhythmic clicking noise through the hull at night, like coded tapping. His logs were confiscated upon return to port. Subsequent NATO files reference a short-lived task force, Project Argo 7 established in 1975 to study submarine signal persistence phenomena. The group included engineers, historians, and ex-German radio technicians. One surviving consultant, Otto Greif, testified in a 1988 interview that the transmitters used by the Kriegsmarine had fail-safes to repeat coded distress loops when command contact was lost. However, these systems required manual reset and external power, impossible after 2 decades underwater, unless, he added, someone had reactivated them. The interview was cut short when Greif abruptly withdrew cooperation, citing security obligations. French coastal authorities denied all knowledge of the 1974 signal, yet fishermen from La Rochelle recalled seeing naval vessels stationed offshore for weeks, their lights extinguished at night. Some spoke of a strange glow beneath the water, like a city grid faintly shining through the sea. The government dismissed it as luminescent plankton. Still, the radio anomaly persisted intermittently for another year before fading completely in 1976. In 1990, with the Cold War's end, fragments of NATO's Project Argo 7 files were declassified. Among them were hydrophone recordings of the final WWII broadcast. Experts analyzed the signal and found inconsistencies in tone spacing, indicating it had not been transmitted by a modern radio but by a mechanical keyer, technology long obsolete. The coordinates embedded in the message pointed again to the Saint-Nazaire coastline. However, when investigators returned, the lower tunnels were completely sealed with new concrete, dated 1977, poured under supervision of NATO engineers. No explanation was recorded. One final document, dated May 3, 1978, and marked Eyes Only, summarized the closure of the case. Residual signal confirmed as relic frequency. Transmission source indeterminate. Structural anomalies within Saint-Nazaire U-boat complex remain classified due to radiation hazard. Recommend permanent containment. Curiously, no radiation reports exist from the site. Locals still refer to the sealed bunker as the talking wall. Some claim that on stormy nights, shortwave radios tuned between 3.2 and 3.4 MHz pick up a faint German voice repeating numbers, ending always with the same phrase, Warten auf Befehl aus Berlin. Whether these are echoes of wartime ghosts, Cold War experiments, or simply the remnants of forgotten machinery, the transmissions of WWII endure in the archives as one of the strangest unsolved anomalies of post-war Europe. In the words of Lieutenant Willis, whose final report remains redacted, "We sealed the past under concrete, but sometimes it still transmits." Chapter 4: The Forgotten War of Glacier Point. Between 1948 and 1951, the US Air Force conducted a classified series of flights over Greenland and the Arctic ice shelf, collectively designated Operation Glacier Point. Officially, these missions were part of post-war meteorological studies and atmospheric nuclear sampling. Unofficially, their true objective was obscured under layers of compartmentalized clearance. Only in declassified fragments decades later would the operation's real aim begin to surface: a search for a missing German research base known as Basis Nordlicht, believed to have vanished under the ice during the final months of World War II. The program's first references appear in Air Force Logistics Command documents from late 1947, a series of requisitions for long-range Arctic reconnaissance. Flights were filed under the command of Colonel Thomas R. Lytle, 46th Strategic Weather Squadron, Thule Detachment. Yet the listed equipment, Geiger counters, deep penetration radar, and classified film stock marked restricted AEC oversight far exceeded standard meteorological needs. One requisition requested 20 sealed lead containers for sample containment, a term typically reserved for radioactive material. The inclusion of 2 civilian consultants from the Atomic Energy Commission raised further questions, though their names remain redacted in the surviving files. Locals from Greenland's east coast began reporting strange activity during those years. Unmarked aircraft, mostly C-54 Skymasters and B-29 derivatives, were seen flying at low altitude across the ice sheet, often at night. Inuit hunters described the sound of engines circling without landing, followed by flashes of light over the horizon. Some recalled American soldiers purchasing supplies in isolated villages and speaking only of weather work. One such villager, Niels Angut, later testified to Danish authorities that he saw 2 great machines on skis being unloaded from a cargo plane at midnight, escorted by armed personnel wearing unmarked uniforms. His testimony was sealed under US diplomatic pressure. The central mystery emerged from an internal Air Force cable dated April 3, 1949, classified Eyes Only, Commander, North Atlantic Wing. It reported the loss of a C-54 transport aircraft, tail number 49287, last transmitting from coordinates near Scoresby Sound. The final radio message read, "Station active. Request extraction." No station was listed in the mission brief, and the message was never explained. Officially, the aircraft was declared missing in severe weather, its wreckage unrecovered. Unofficially, one recovered communications log from Thule Air Base noted, "Partial signal return received 12 hours post-loss," despite no aircraft being in the area. In 1951, Operation Glacier Point was abruptly terminated. The program's files were sealed, and all involved personnel reassigned to unrelated posts. The official explanation cited budget cuts, yet a classified memo from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, to the Department of Defense mentioned unsuccessful containment of foreign origin apparatus. The phrase, foreign origin apparatus, appears nowhere else in Air Force archives before or after this event. 2 decades later, during a particularly warm summer in 1977, a geological expedition near Scoresby Sound stumbled upon metallic debris emerging from the thawing ice. The fragments bore English stenciling, but displayed alloy compositions inconsistent with standard military aviation material. When Danish scientists attempted to ship samples to Copenhagen, their transport was intercepted at Thule by US Air Force personnel. Within days, the entire site was declared an exclusion zone for meteorological safety. Local newspapers reported only that a possible Cold War aircraft had been discovered. Behind the scenes, Danish government memos expressed frustration at the lack of access, noting intense US activity and communications blackout over the affected area. Among the few surviving witnesses was Captain Harold Devereux, a navigator who served under Operation Glacier Point. In a recorded 1986 interview for an oral history project, he described one of the final missions in chilling detail. "We were tracking magnetic anomalies," he said, "like compass needles bending in circles. On one flight, the radar picked up a structure, metallic, about 200 feet under the ice. Square angles, not natural. We marked the coordinates and radioed command. Next day, they scrubbed the mission and told us never to mention it again." When asked if he believed it was a German installation, Devereux replied, "Whatever it wasn't from our side. The brass looked scared." A 1999 release of partial Project RAN documents added further intrigue. One section referenced a continuing interest in relic, structures located beneath the Greenlandic ice shelf, believed to contain technological remnants from wartime Arctic operations. The file cited Basis Nordlicht by name, describing it as an abandoned polar test site established by German Scientific Detachment K-23 in 1944 for experimentation with compact reactor modules. No such detachment appears in German military archives, but surviving SS research memos mention attempts to construct autonomous Arctic energy stations. The implication was that Basis Nordlicht may have been an early attempt at self-sustaining reactor technology, something far beyond the scope of 1940s Germany. Satellite imaging conducted by private companies in the early 2000s revealed irregular shapes buried deep beneath the Greenland ice sheet near the same coordinates reported by Devereaux's flight logs. One anomaly in particular, a rectangular outline measuring roughly 90 by 120 meters, stood out for its geometric precision. The U.S. Geological Survey declined to comment on whether the formation was natural or artificial. Requests for access to the site under scientific research proposals were repeatedly denied by the U.S. Air Force, which continues to maintain restricted airspace above the region. The zone remains listed as Meteorological Hazard Sector. Bravo 12, a designation used nowhere else on official charts. Rumors persist among local workers at Thule Air Base that a deep storage facility exists beneath the ice cap, built during the 1950s to house material recovered during Operation Glacier Point. Some describe shipments arriving by C-124 Globemaster under heavy guard, loaded with lead-sealed crates that were never logged. No official record of such deliveries survives. Today, the story of Glacier Point occupies an obscure corner of Cold War mythology, a footnote between vanished flights and redacted reports. The official stance remains that the missions were routine scientific exercises. Yet, the convergence of missing aircraft, confiscated wreckage, and Cold War secrecy paints a darker portrait. Whatever the US Air Force found in those frozen plains of Greenland, it was something worth burying again beneath the ice. The Arctic preserves its secrets well. Its silence is not empty. It's layered, like the ice itself. Beneath the snow and decades of denial may still lie the relics of Basis Nordlicht, humming faintly in the frozen dark, a remnant of a war that stretched far beyond its recorded end. Operation Glacier Point remains sealed in the archives, its official record ending with a single sentence typed in black ink. Subject location inaccessible. Further recovery unnecessary. Chapter 5. Codename. Ashgarden. The Erased Manhattan Files. In March 1952, deep within the sub-basement of the Atomic Energy Commission's Washington headquarters, a nondescript file marked Project Ashgarden was withdrawn from restricted circulation. The file, labeled Special Materials Audit, Los Alamos Sector, documented a quiet internal inquiry into the unexplained loss of several nuclear components left over from the Manhattan Project. Its purpose, according to a memorandum to the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, was to resolve discrepancies in isotopic accounting prior to the 1947 reorganization. What began as routine clerical reconciliation quickly spiraled into one of the most heavily redacted investigations in post-war US history. The discrepancies centered on material, referred to cryptically as Element 97B, not a natural isotope, but an experimental compound synthesized during late-war testing at Los Alamos. The surviving paperwork suggests it was part of a classified sub-program known as Project Seraphim, overseen by Colonel L.R. Boyd, an engineer with clearance equivalent to Oppenheimer's senior staff. Boyd's logs were destroyed in what was described as a containment fire in 1948, but a carbon copy of one entry survived in the files of the Army Corps of Engineers. 97B storage complete. Reaction unstable. Recommend cold containment or total burial. No record of that containment site exists today. The Ashgarden inquiry began after auditors discovered that multiple containers listed under 97B inventory had been signed out in 1946 by civilian contractors affiliated with Operation Paperclip, former German scientists integrated into US defense projects. The transfer logs were missing signatures, but 3 names appeared across unrelated documents: Dr. Erich Hauser, physicist; Dr. Klaus Behrendt, metallurgist; and Dr. Lotte Wehner, radiochemist, all previously associated with the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physik in Berlin. All 3 had relocated to Huntsville, Alabama, to work under Army ordnance on propulsion and energy research. In June 1952, the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence took control of the Ashgarden file. Field teams dispatched to Huntsville reported finding a disused warehouse formerly leased by Continental Aerodynamics Research Ltd., a front company tied to early rocketry programs. Inside, sealed lead containers had been embedded directly into the concrete floor, surrounded by layers of insulation. One debrief report describes active readings despite shielding and a faint odor of ozone. Within 24 hours, the site was placed under military quarantine, and all on-site documentation was seized. Public records list the warehouse as demolished for urban renewal the following year. An internal AEC memo dated August 18, 1952, contained one of the few explicit descriptions of the recovered material. Sample composition unknown, not plutonium, uranium, or thorium, emits non-thermal luminescence in total darkness. Handling discouraged pending containment redesign. The memo, initialed only JDW, references cross-agency consultations with the newly formed NSA for signal interference analysis, implying the material emitted measurable radio frequencies. If true, it would suggest a form of radiation outside known spectrums at the time. By 1953, Project Ashgarden had metastasized into a multi-agency effort involving the CIA, AEC, and Air Force Research Command. It operated from a remote testing site in Nevada, not far from the existing nuclear test range. Workers were told they were assisting with environmental testing, but among the recovered fragments of correspondence was a note from an Air Force physicist warning of non-linear radiation decay and intermittent energy spikes. His final message, sent in October 1953, ends abruptly. If readings persist, containment impossible. Evacuate sector before next fluctuation. Following that date, all references to Project Ashgarden vanish from the AEC index. 2 decades later, investigative journalist Helen Grant stumbled upon the name while researching Cold War waste management. In 1973, she filed a Freedom of Information request seeking details on Project Ashgarden, Special Materials Division. The response came months later, denied under the clause, ongoing national defense interest. Shortly after, Grant reported being followed and receiving anonymous phone calls warning her to stop digging in buried files. In her final article draft, never published, she described a source, a retired Air Force technician, who claimed to have seen glowing residue sealed inside a vault at Redstone Arsenal. Her notes end with a single handwritten line. Boyd still classified. Ashgarden still active. Grant vanished in 1974 during a road trip through New Mexico. Her car was found abandoned on Route 54, her notes missing. Declassification efforts in the 1990s produced only fragments. One surviving document, File 17C, under AEC Archive, Lost Projects, includes a half-burned page containing an image of a containment canister labeled 97B Seraphim Compound. The photograph's margin bears an annotation in faded typewriter ink. Recovered material inconsistent with known isotopes, further study prohibited. Beneath the note, a second line written by hand. Object returned to original origin. Directive 6352. The meaning of original origin remains unknown. In 2007, an unmarked Air Force storage facility outside Huntsville, officially inactive since 1961, was quietly demolished after reports of subsurface contamination. Civilian contractors described unusual precautions, including Geiger counters that reportedly spiked in rhythm, like a heartbeat. No contamination reports were released, though local groundwater sampling shortly after showed elevated beryllium levels. Within months, the area was paved and incorporated into a new logistics complex, its foundations laid directly over the sealed ground. Today, Project Ashgarden remains a ghost in the archive, its name whispered among historians of nuclear secrecy. The official record contains no trace of Colonel Boyd, no mention of element 97B, and no conclusive evidence of recovered material. Yet the fragments that persist, photographs of glowing containers, vanished researchers, and a vanished journalist, hint at a darker continuity between wartime research and post-war containment. Perhaps the greatest mystery lies in the coded reference repeated across several declassified memos. Control achieved by inversion of source field. Scientists reviewing the phrase decades later admitted it made no physical sense. But to those who handled the Ashgarden files, the implication was simple. Something had been discovered that behaved unlike any known element. Something unstable, not only in energy, but in meaning. If buried, it may still pulse beneath the soil of Huntsville, humming faintly like the heart of an unfinished weapon. And like the other secrets of the war, its silence endures, not forgotten, merely contained. By the time the last files were sealed and the final witnesses died, all 5 cases, Frostveil, Cathedral, WWII, Glacier Point, and Ashgarden, had been erased from official memory. Yet their traces persist, scattered through archives, redacted reports, and whispered recollections of those who served in shadows. Each story ends the same way. A signal lost, a chamber sealed, a wreck under ice, a file withdrawn. Perhaps none of them were accidents, but coordinates in a larger map of secrets drawn in the aftermath of war. If history is written by the victors, then what remains unrecorded belongs to the ghosts, and the ghosts, it seems, are still transmitting.